The afternoon sun beat down on the busy city street, people rushing past in their own little worlds. But for Jonathan Roumie, it was just another walk, quiet, calm, unassuming. He carried his bag over his shoulder, hands relaxed, eyes scanning the crowd. Nothing about him suggested drama, nothing screamed danger or trouble. Yet trouble found him. A police officer, known in the neighborhood for his temper, swaggered toward him. Officer Harris wasn't subtle. His presence demanded attention, his voice demanded fear. He barked orders at anyone who dared cross his path, and most people did exactly that. They stepped aside, averted their eyes, muttered apologies. But Jonathan, he didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He just kept walking. "Hey! Stop right there!" the officer shouted. Jonathan slowed, looked up, calm and composed. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked politely. The officer's face twisted into a sneer. "Yeah, there's a problem. You're in my space. You need to show some respect." Jonathan gave a small, measured nod. Of course. Respect is important. But respect wasn't on the officer's mind. Power was. Authority. Control. And then, the slap came. A sharp, loud smack echoed across the street. Jonathan's cheek stung slightly, but his expression didn't change. He didn't shout. He didn't push back. He simply looked at the officer with calm, steady eyes, like someone who had seen 1,000 small storms and knew how fleeting they were. Pedestrians froze. Some gasped. Others pulled out their phones, capturing the moment in disbelief. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is this guy? Why isn't he fighting back?" The officer, puffed up with arrogance, smirked. "That'll teach you," he said, expecting submission, expecting fear. Jonathan's voice was quiet, almost soft, but it carried through the tension like a bell cutting through fog. "Sir, I'm the new chief." For a heartbeat, the world paused. The laughter, the smirk, the arrogance, all of it froze in place. The air seemed to thicken. People's jaws dropped. Phones hovered mid-air. The officer's hand trembled slightly as he realized. He had just slapped the person who now held the ultimate authority. And just like that, the street transformed. The energy shifted. Respect, once assumed, now demanded acknowledgement. The city hummed with its usual rhythm. Cars honked, street vendors shouted over the din of passing crowds, and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, focused on their own schedules. Downtown was always a mix of chaos and routine, but to those who paid attention, it was also a stage where power plays happened quietly, subtle acts that revealed who commanded respect and who assumed it. Jonathan Roumie walked calmly through the street, an unassuming figure amid the swirling energy. His jeans were simple, his jacket unremarkable, his shoes worn but clean. No flashy watch, no designer bag, no entourage. Just a man moving through his day with quiet confidence. Nearby, Officer Harris prowled. He was a figure known to everyone in the area. Tall, imposing, a sharp uniform that seemed almost like armor for his ego. He carried authority like a weapon, wielding it at will. Harris believed power was shown through dominance, intimidation, and the occasional public humiliation. Most people in the neighborhood avoided him, not out of fear of the law, but fear of his pride. That day, the two worlds collided. Jonathan slowed as he approached a corner. He didn't notice Harris at first. He was too busy scanning the street, taking in the small moments, the young woman helping an elderly man cross, a child chasing a ball, a vendor laughing at a customer's joke. In Jonathan's world, respect was earned through observation, understanding, and quiet action, not bluster. Harris noticed him immediately. The man wasn't paying attention, wasn't showing fear, wasn't even slightly deferential. That lack of reaction stung the officer's ego. "Hey, you there!" Harris barked, stepping in front of him. His voice cut through the street noise like a whip. "Stop right there." Jonathan paused. Slowly, calmly. "Yes, officer," he asked. His tone was polite, but there was a weight to it, a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with Harris's aggressive display. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who I am? You can't just walk past me like that. You need to show some respect." Jonathan inclined his head slightly. "Respect is important," he said evenly, his gaze steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't act defensively. He simply stood there, his presence grounding the moment. The crowd around them began to notice. A few pedestrians slowed, sensing the tension. One or two whispered to each other. Harris's reputation preceded him, and people could feel the storm brewing. Harris, however, was blinded by his own arrogance. "You think just saying polite words will keep you safe," he snapped. "Out here, respect is earned by authority. And I decide who earns it." Jonathan's lips curved slightly into a faint smile. "Authority is not about fear," he said. "It's about responsibility. Power without respect is meaningless." The officer scoffed, mistaking Jonathan's calm demeanor for weakness. That's when the slap landed. A sharp, startling sound echoed down the street. The crowd gasped collectively, some instinctively raising their phones to record. A few people flinched, thinking the situation might escalate. Jonathan's head jerked slightly from the impact, but he didn't shout, didn't retaliate. He simply looked at Harris with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the officer's arrogance. Around them, time seemed to slow, the street, the traffic, the honking horns, all fading into the background. For a moment, the officer's smirk remained. He expected fear. He expected an apology. Maybe even tears. But all he got was quiet, unwavering confidence. "Sir," Jonathan said, his voice calm, deliberate, carrying over the murmur of the crowd. "I'm the new chief." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Pedestrians froze. Phones wavered mid-recording. Harris blinked, trying to comprehend the reality in front of him. The laughter he had anticipated vanished, replaced by silence and disbelief. Jonathan's calm, measured presence contrasted sharply with Harris's arrogance, making the crowd realize something immediately. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. The street that had moments ago been full of tension now buzzed with anticipation. Everyone could feel the magnitude of the moment, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. And the lesson was simple. Authority without humility is fragile. Jonathan adjusted his bag over his shoulder, his movements deliberate but effortless. Every detail mattered. The way he stood, the way he spoke, the way he never raised his voice. His presence alone commanded attention, but not through fear. It was through respect earned in the moment. For Officer Harris, realization began to sink in. He had made a mistake, one that would not be forgotten by anyone witnessing it. The slap, intended as a show of power, had inadvertently revealed his greatest vulnerability, arrogance. Around them, the crowd whispered, exchanged glances, and some even started smiling. They could feel that something extraordinary was unfolding, something that would linger in memory far longer than the ordinary chaos of the city street. Jonathan Roumie wasn't just a man walking down the street. In that moment, he became a symbol, calm, composed, unyielding in the face of disrespect. And the stage was set for what would come next. The street seemed to hold its breath. Jonathan Roumie stood with quiet authority, his calm gaze fixed on Officer Harris, who was struggling to process what had just happened. A slap meant to assert power had failed spectacularly, and the consequences were already rippling through the crowd. Pedestrians paused, their chatter silenced, as if the city itself were watching this moment unfold. Harris's hand trembled slightly. He had expected fear. He had expected submission. Instead, he got a man who didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't make a scene. The arrogance that usually fueled Harris's authority now collided with an unyielding presence that he couldn't comprehend. "Wait, what did you just say?" Harris stammered, his voice tight. His usual bravado wavered, revealing cracks in the armor he so carefully constructed over years on the force. Jonathan's expression didn't change. Calm, measured, almost serene, he repeated, "I'm the new chief." The words struck like lightning. Around them, the crowd leaned in, instinctively sensing the shift. Phones raised, some recording, some trembling in the hands of those witnessing the transformation of authority in real time. Harris's eyes darted around, seeking validation, reassurance, a lifeline. The pedestrian stares only magnified his panic. Whispers traveled fast. "Is he serious? The new chief? I think he really is." Harris took a step back, but his ego resisted retreat. He squared his shoulders, tried to regain dominance, tried to reclaim control. You can't just say that. Who gave you? Who put you in charge? Jonathan's voice remained steady, deliberate. Authority is not given, sir. Responsibility is assumed. I am here now to ensure order and respect. Your actions just demonstrated why this change was necessary. A ripple ran through the crowd. A few people gasped audibly. Others exchanged looks, as if collectively realizing they were witnessing a real-life lesson in humility and accountability. The slap, meant to intimidate, had turned into Harris's public unraveling. You can't treat people like this. Harris shouted, his tone rising in desperation. His fists clenched at his sides, but his confidence had vanished, replaced by the first hints of fear. I enforce the law. I enforce respect. Jonathan tilted his head slightly, maintaining eye contact, unshaken. Respect isn't enforced. It's earned. And authority without humility is fragile. Today, you proved both. Harris's face drained of color. His usual smirk had vanished, replaced by a grimace of disbelief. He looked around, hoping to see someone back him up, someone to reinforce the image of power he had carefully cultivated. But the street told a different story. Passers-by were whispering, recording, and judging silently. Even the other officers on patrol, stationed nearby, had stopped in their tracks, unsure how to react. Jonathan didn't move aggressively. He didn't raise his voice. He simply exuded a quiet, unshakable authority that contrasted sharply with Harris's fraying arrogance. The difference was palpable. The crowd could feel it. The lesson was clear. The man who seemed weak at first glance was, in reality, in complete control. You don't understand. Harris sputtered, his voice cracking. I have years of experience. You can't just... Jonathan interrupted, softly but firmly. Experience means nothing if it is not accompanied by wisdom. Authority is meaningless if it is wielded with arrogance. Today, you've shown that power used to belittle others is powerless when confronted with integrity. The words hung in the air. Silence followed. The street, once noisy with urban chaos, now seemed to shrink around the two men. Every pedestrian, every driver, every passerby felt the weight of the moment. Harris's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him. His anger, which had fueled the slap, had turned into shame. Around him, murmurs of disbelief spread. Did he just? He's the chief. I can't believe this is happening. Jonathan adjusted his bag slightly, his movements calm and deliberate, signaling the end of the confrontation. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to hit back. His quiet authority had done what arrogance never could, command respect instantly and irreversibly. The officer's ego, once a towering presence, now lay exposed and vulnerable. The crowd began to murmur appreciatively, some even whispering encouragement to Jonathan. The transformation was complete. The man who had been slapped had become the symbol of integrity and humility. The man who had slapped, the symbol of arrogance and recklessness. Jonathan took a measured step back, giving the officer space, his eyes never leaving Harris's. The street remained silent, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone watching knew something profound had just happened. This was not merely a confrontation, it was a lesson. And the lesson was simple, yet powerful. Respect cannot be demanded. It cannot be forced with fear or intimidation. True authority is silent, steady, and earned through calm, unwavering integrity. Jonathan Roumie, the man who had been slapped in public, had turned the moment into a masterclass in humility, power, and self-control. And for Officer Harris, the realization was devastating. The man he had underestimated was now unquestionably in command. The street was no longer just a city block, it had become a stage. Pedestrians, vendors, and even drivers in passing cars seemed to sense that something extraordinary had occurred. Jonathan Roumie had not reacted with anger, had not called for backup, had not raised his voice. Yet the impact of the confrontation rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into a still pond. Officer Harris's face was pale. His ego, once towering, had crumbled under the weight of the quiet authority standing before him. The realization that he had slapped the new chief, and the calmness with which Jonathan had responded, was a blow more severe than any physical confrontation could have been. People who had been merely watching from a distance now drew closer. Some whispered among themselves, their voices carrying disbelief. Did he just tell him he's the chief? I can't believe that officer got slapped and didn't retaliate. Who even is this guy? A young man on a nearby bench raised his phone, capturing every detail. This is going viral, he muttered under his breath. Others nodded, some shaking their heads in awe. It wasn't just that Jonathan hadn't fought back. It was the calmness, the composure, the undeniable sense that he was in control without needing to assert it through aggression. Officer Harris tried to regain some semblance of authority. He straightened his uniform, squared his shoulders, and attempted to bark orders at Jonathan again. Step aside. Move along. You don't have the right to. Jonathan interrupted him with a simple, firm statement. Authority is not a right, it's a responsibility. Today, you've shown that you wield yours poorly. The words hung in the air, heavier than any shout. The crowd leaned in, collectively absorbing the moment. Pedestrians stopped mid-step, a young mother clutched her child tighter, and a few street vendors paused, as if the world itself had slowed down. Some onlookers whispered their admiration. I would never have kept my cool like that. He didn't even flinch. Wow. This man has more power in his calm than Harris has in his badge. Harris's face shifted through a range of emotions: anger, confusion, shame, disbelief. The slap that was meant to establish dominance had done the opposite. It had revealed his weakness, his arrogance, and the fragility of authority without integrity. Every word Jonathan spoke chipped away at the facade he had relied on for years. Meanwhile, Jonathan adjusted his bag and glanced around the street, acknowledging the crowd without a word. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no need to revel in the moment. The lesson was already unfolding on its own. Respect, after all, is most powerful when it is earned quietly. People began murmuring among themselves, trying to piece together who Jonathan was. Some recognized him, some didn't. Whispers spread like wildfire. Isn't that Jonathan Roumie? The actor. Wait, the new chief. The disbelief was tangible, almost electric. Even other officers nearby, who had watched the entire confrontation unfold, exchanged glances. Harris had been known to enforce his presence with intimidation, yet here was a man who had neutralized the threat not with force, but with composure and quiet authority. A few officers nodded subtly, recognizing a lesson they'd likely never forget. Harris's hands dropped to his sides. His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, realizing words wouldn't restore his authority. The crowd's focus was no longer on him, it was on Jonathan. Jonathan stepped back, allowing the natural flow of the street to resume, but the energy didn't dissipate. People lingered, recording, whispering, sharing what they had just witnessed. The slap, once intended as an act of dominance, had become a public lesson in humility and the silent power of composure. A young boy near the corner tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, he's like a hero." She smiled, unsure of what to say, but understanding instinctively what the boy meant. The message was clear: power alone is fleeting, respect, when earned quietly, lasts. Harris finally swallowed hard, his mind racing. The impact of the moment went deeper than he expected. He had thought the encounter would assert his dominance, but instead, it exposed him. His ego, his authority, his entire approach had been challenged, and he had failed. Jonathan looked once more at the crowd, nodded slightly, and continued walking. His calm presence had already shifted the dynamics of the street. People whispered, nodded, and exchanged glances that said, "I just saw something incredible." For Harris, the humiliation was absolute. For the crowd, the lesson was clear. And for Jonathan, nothing had changed outwardly. Yet inwardly, the ripples of his quiet authority had already begun to transform everyone who had witnessed the encounter. That day, a slap intended to humiliate instead became the spark for reflection, awe, and undeniable respect. Every person on that street knew they had witnessed something rare. True authority in its most powerful form, not through fear, but through composure, integrity, and humility. Jonathan Roumie's steps were steady, calm, deliberate. The street still buzzed with the lingering tension of the earlier confrontation. Pedestrians whispered, their phones still raised, recording the aftermath of the moment that had completely flipped the balance of power. Even a few officers nearby were hesitant to move, glancing nervously between Harris and Jonathan, unsure how to react to a situation that had clearly gone far beyond their expectations. Harris, meanwhile, was frozen. He stared after Jonathan, his mind racing. How could this man, who had taken a slap and not reacted, who had faced him calmly and spoken with quiet authority, suddenly claim he was the new chief? The words had struck deeper than any reprimand could have. Authority, Harris realized, wasn't about ego or force. It was about presence, control, and respect. And Jonathan had all three in abundance. The tension hung heavy, and then, unexpectedly, the sound of a sleek black car stopping outside caught everyone's attention. Its polished body gleamed in the afternoon sun, a subtle announcement that something important was arriving. Doors opened smoothly, and three figures stepped out, carrying a folder of documents and looking purposeful. Their steps were precise, almost ceremonial, yet there was an unmistakable urgency in their movement. Jonathan stopped mid-step and nodded slightly at them. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. The crowd murmured. Phones were raised higher. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "What's happening?" The tallest of the three executives approached Jonathan, handing him the folder. "Mr. Roumie," he said, "we've been waiting for you. Everything is ready. It's time to finalize the transfer." The word transfer caused a ripple of confusion through the onlookers. Harris's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes widened. "Wait, transfer? What are you talking about?" Jonathan opened the folder calmly, scanning through the documents. "This is exactly why I came today," he said softly, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "I came to observe the branch, to see how authority is exercised. Unfortunately," he glanced at Harris, who was still frozen in disbelief, "some lessons are learned the hard way." Harris's knees buckled slightly. He had slapped a man he thought was powerless. He had tried to intimidate him, to assert dominance over someone he assumed was insignificant. And now, the truth hit him like a punch harder than any physical blow. Jonathan Roumie wasn't just a man walking down the street. He was the new chief of the precinct, the ultimate authority. Around them, the crowd began to react. Gasps, murmurs, and whispers spread like wildfire. Some pedestrians shook their heads in disbelief. Others exchanged glances, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Phones continued to record. Clips were already being shared with captions like, "You won't believe who this is." Harris's voice finally broke the silence, shaky and low. You mean you're the chief? You're in charge here." Jonathan's expression didn't waver. He nodded slightly. "Yes. I assumed responsibility today. And part of responsibility is recognizing when authority is misused." The crowd leaned in, some murmuring words of admiration. A few clapped quietly, hesitant but sincere. The lesson was impossible to miss. Arrogance, aggression, and misuse of power are fleeting. Composure, integrity, and humility are enduring. Harris stumbled back a step, almost as if the reality was physically pushing him. He could feel the weight of the mistake he had made. The slap, meant to assert dominance, had become a public testament to his arrogance. Every person who witnessed it had seen the truth. The man he underestimated now held ultimate authority. Jonathan carefully closed the folder and straightened his jacket. Today, a lesson was learned. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. Authority is not proved through fear, it is demonstrated through integrity. And humility, he glanced at the crowd, his voice firm yet calm, is the true measure of a person's strength. The executives behind him nodded, signaling their approval. They moved smoothly, efficiently, and with quiet authority, emphasizing that Jonathan was not alone in his new role. His presence carried weight that could not be ignored, and everyone, officers, pedestrians, even Harris, understood it instantly. Harris sank to his knees, trembling, unable to meet Jonathan's calm gaze. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Jonathan's eyes softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "That is exactly the point. You should not act without understanding. Authority without respect leads only to regret." The crowd remained silent, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Phones continued to record, capturing not just the confrontation, but the complete reversal of power, the moment where arrogance was humbled and true leadership revealed itself. Jonathan Roumie took a final measured step, nodding once to the crowd, and turned. "The lesson," he knew, had been delivered. The respect that had been earned quietly would last far longer than any fear Harris had tried to impose. The street, once ordinary, now felt historic. Pedestrians whispered, some shaking their heads in awe, others smiling at having witnessed something unforgettable. A slap intended to assert dominance had instead revealed who truly commanded authority. And everyone who saw it knew they had just witnessed a masterclass in humility, integrity, and quiet power. The street remained quiet in the moments after Jonathan Roumie turned to leave. Pedestrians lingered, their phones still raised, not wanting to miss a single movement. The tension that had gripped the block only moments before had begun to settle, replaced by a quiet awe. People exchanged glances, muttering to each other, "I've never seen anything like that." He didn't even raise his voice. And yet, everything changed. Officer Harris stayed on his knees, his uniform rumpled, his face pale and ashamed. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, not physically, but internally. Every ounce of ego, every sense of dominance he had carried into the confrontation, had been stripped away by a calm glance and a measured word. Jonathan stopped, glanced back at Harris, and spoke softly yet firmly. "You see, true authority is not taken by force. It is earned through humility, respect, and wisdom. Today was a lesson, for you, for the crowd, and for anyone watching who thinks power is proved through intimidation." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some nodded, others whispered words of admiration. A few of the pedestrians had tears in their eyes, overwhelmed by the raw humanity of what had just occurred. They had witnessed not just a confrontation, but a lesson in dignity, courage, and the subtle power of calm integrity. Harris swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I acted foolishly." Jonathan stepped closer, his presence still commanding yet gentle. "That's exactly the point. Assumptions lead to mistakes. Ego leads to regret. You don't need to grovel to me. What you need is to reflect on how you treat others when you think no one is watching." Harris lowered his head, the weight of the lesson pressing on him. The arrogance that had guided his career was now replaced by humility, a humility he could not ignore. He understood that his behavior had consequences, and that authority without respect was meaningless. Jonathan turned to the crowd, acknowledging the witnesses with a slight nod. "The lesson here is not just for him," he said. "It is for all of us. Every day, we encounter situations where our behavior matters. True power is silent. True respect is earned, not demanded. And the choices we make in small moments define the impact we have on the world." He paused, letting the words sink in. Pedestrians, officers, and even street vendors listened intently, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Jonathan's calm composure, combined with his firm words, created an aura that demanded reflection. Then he looked at Harris again. "From this moment forward, how you conduct yourself will speak louder than any badge, any uniform, any title. Make the choice wisely." Harris nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but enough to signal understanding. He remained on his knees for a few more seconds, then slowly rose, his posture humbled, his expression transformed. The lesson had landed. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the energy lingered. People shared what they had witnessed, speaking in hushed tones to each other. "I've never seen someone handle that with such composure. That was a masterclass in humility. He didn't even fight back, and yet he changed everything." Jonathan adjusted his bag, turned, and began walking again. His movements were deliberate, confident, and unassuming all at once. The street, once ordinary and filled with the mundane chaos of a city afternoon, now felt historic, a place where an unforgettable lesson had been taught. Harris watched him go, internalizing every moment, every word. He understood now that humility was not weakness, that calm authority could command more respect than force, and that true leadership required integrity above all else. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his career, and for the rest of his life. The pedestrians who had witnessed the scene would remember it too. Phones would replay the moment countless times, stories would be shared, and the lesson would ripple far beyond that city block. Jonathan Roumie, by simply remaining calm, composed, and respectful, had transformed an act of disrespect into a timeless lesson on authority, humility, and true power. As Jonathan disappeared from sight, the street slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Yet the energy had changed forever. Those who had watched knew that respect, composure, and integrity were more powerful than fear, aggression, or ego. And in that quiet, transformative way, Jonathan had left a mark on everyone present, one that would endure far longer than any slap, any shout, or any display of forced authority. For Officer Harris, it was a moment of reckoning. For the crowd, it was a moment of inspiration. And for Jonathan Roumie, it was simply another day of demonstrating the quiet, enduring strength of humility and true leadership. The street, once filled with noise and confusion, had quieted. Pedestrians moved on with their day, but something invisible lingered in the air, a lesson, subtle yet unforgettable, that would echo long after the crowd dispersed. Phones had recorded the encounter, whispers had spread like wildfire, and those who had witnessed the event firsthand carried with them a story that would be retold countless times. How a calm, composed man turned an act of disrespect into a masterclass in authority and humility. Jonathan Roumie walked steadily down the street, his steps deliberate, his posture relaxed but confident. He didn't glance back, didn't demand recognition, didn't gloat. His presence alone had conveyed more authority than any raised voice or shouted order ever could. The lesson he imparted was not loud. It didn't need to be. Power, true power, is quiet, steady, and earned, not asserted through intimidation or force. Officer Harris, still kneeling moments earlier, had now regained his footing. The weight of the encounter pressed heavily on him, yet there was a seed of understanding planted deep within. The slap, the confrontation, the shock of seeing authority so effortlessly demonstrated, all of it had crystallized into a lesson that Harris would carry forever. He understood now that leadership is not about ego, titles, or control. It is about responsibility, integrity, and respect. Around them, the city moved on, unaware in its usual rhythm, yet the impact of the moment had changed the people who had witnessed it. Pedestrians replayed the scene in their minds, marveling at the composure Jonathan had maintained. "He didn't even raise his voice," one woman whispered to her friend. And yet, everyone listened. Everyone respected him. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, eyes wide. "Mom, he's like a hero," he said. She smiled, realizing that the lesson extended beyond authority and confrontation. It was a lesson about human dignity, humility, and the quiet strength that comes from being centered in one's principles. Jonathan's calm demeanor, his ability to turn a potentially humiliating situation into a teachable moment, demonstrated a truth often overlooked. Respect is not a currency that can be demanded, bought, or forced. It is earned through consistent, thoughtful behavior, through patience, understanding, and quiet confidence. In every interaction, whether with a stranger, a peer, or someone who believes they hold power over you, the choices you make define the impression you leave behind. Jonathan's response had transformed not only the moment but the people who experienced it firsthand. Officer Harris had been humbled, the crowd had been inspired, and the narrative had shifted from conflict to reflection, from aggression to understanding. Jonathan Roumie didn't need recognition, applause, or social media fame. The power of the moment lay in the ripple effect. Those who witnessed it carried the lesson forward, sharing it with others, reinforcing the principle that true authority comes not from force, but from composure, respect, and integrity. The slap that had started as a symbol of arrogance and aggression had ended as a mirror, reflecting the strength and virtue that comes from calm confidence and unwavering respect for others. It was a reminder to every onlooker that the moments we think are small, an exchange on the street, a brief confrontation, a quiet choice, can have profound consequences and lasting impact. Jonathan continued walking, fading into the rhythm of the city, but the lesson remained. The street had become a classroom, and everyone who had been present had learned something invaluable. Humility is strength, composure is power, and respect is the ultimate authority. The story of the street, the slap, and the revelation would be shared, remembered, and retold. It would inspire people to pause before reacting, to consider the impact of their behavior, and to recognize that every interaction is an opportunity to demonstrate integrity. The moral was simple yet profound. You cannot demand respect. You must earn it, quietly, consistently, and with integrity. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is real strength. Share where you're watching from, and take a moment to reflect on the ways you can lead through calm, composed authority in your own life. Because the truth is universal, power may impress, but humility inspires. Force can intimidate, but integrity commands loyalty. And in the end, it is the choices made in quiet moments that define the legacy we leave behind. Jonathan Roumie had walked away, but the lesson he left behind was louder than any shout, stronger than any slap, and more enduring than any display of arrogance. True power is silent. True respect is earned. And everyone who witnessed it would carry that truth forward, forever.